Anatomy 32, Chapter 22, the Endocrine System. Topics: Pineal Gland, Thymus, Thyroid Gland, Parathyroid Gland, Adrenal Cortex, and Adrenal Medulla. So, the pineal gland. The pineal gland, as we know, is part of the brain, specifically part of the epithalamus. And pineal gland acts independent of the anterior pituitary gland. The way the pineal gland works is it is stimulated by the lack of light being received by our eyes. So during the daytime, when we are exposed to light, the pineal gland is not producing hormone. And at night, when it's dark, the pineal gland will produce hormone. And that hormone is melatonin. And the role of melatonin is to signal that it's time for us to become sleepy and go to sleep. So melatonin is part of the circadian rhythm, and it signals to other brain structures that it's time to get the body sleepy. All right, the thymus. The thymus is located in the thoracic cavity, a little superior to the heart. It also functions independent of the anterior pituitary gland. The thymus's role is that it produces a collection of thymic hormones that will help T cells proliferate and mature. So after immature T cells are produced by the red bone marrow, they travel through the bloodstream to the thymus and go into the thymus and then are exposed to these thymic hormones and proliferate and mature to functional T lymphocytes, helper T cells, cytotoxic T cells, etc. All right, the thyroid gland. Thyroid gland, as mentioned before, is in the inferior portion of the neck below the thyroid cartilage. And the thyroid hormone is shaped a little bit like a butterfly, so it kind of has two lobes that are connected. Thyroid hormone produces a few different kinds of hormones. One of these is the thyroid hormones, technically two different hormones, but they have the basic same function. The thyroid hormones increase the basal metabolic rate. So they increase the overall metabolic rate within the body, within the cells of the body. So the thyroid hormones do things like stimulate protein production. More protein is being produced, cells are more active. It increases the use of glucose. Again, cells are going to be more active. They need more energy, so they need more glucose. And it also can help to accelerate body growth and development. So while the human growth hormone is the main factor for how tall someone will get, proper levels of thyroid hormones are needed also for proper growth, although their effects are much milder. The other category of hormone is calcitonin. Calcitonin is released when calcium levels are high. So the thyroid gland will monitor the bloodstream for calcium levels, and when those calcium levels get too high, it will release calcitonin. Then, not a surprise, calcitonin causes the blood levels of calcium and phosphate to lower. And calcitonin does this in two ways. One, it inhibits the activity of osteoclasts. So I'm sure you remember osteoclasts are the cells that break down bone tissue, thereby releasing calcium and phosphate into the bloodstream. So if they are inhibited, less calcium and phosphate is being sent out into the bloodstream. The other thing calcitonin does is stimulates osteoblasts. Osteoblasts are bone cells that build up bone tissue. When they build up bone tissue, calcium and phosphate is removed from the bloodstream. So by decreasing the calcium put into the bloodstream and increasing the amount of calcium removed from the bloodstream, calcitonin is able to lower overall calcium and phosphate levels in the bloodstream. So these are the main hormones produced by the thyroid gland, with the thyroid hormones controlled by the anterior pituitary gland and calcitonin controlled by calcium levels in the bloodstream. Parathyroid glands produce the parathyroid hormone. Parathyroid glands are attached to the posterior sides of the thyroid hormone. The parathyroid glands are paying attention, are monitoring the levels of calcium in the bloodstream. And when calcium levels get low, the parathyroid gland produces parathyroid hormone. So the role of the parathyroid hormone is to increase the levels of calcium in the bloodstream and also decrease the levels of phosphate. Don't want too much phosphate in the bloodstream. How does it do this? Well, one thing parathyroid hormone does is stimulates osteoclasts. It makes the osteoclasts more active. Again, osteoclasts are bone cells that break down bone tissue, releasing calcium and phosphate into the bloodstream. And then it also stimulates the kidneys to increase the excretion, the release of phosphate. So the kidneys will pull more phosphate out of the bloodstream and release it in the urine. And clearly between the calcitonin and parathyroid hormones, our body is able to help regulate the calcium level in the bloodstream. All right, the adrenal glands. So the adrenal glands are found in the abdominal cavity. They are directly superior to the kidneys. The adrenal glands, it turns out, are actually two separate glands found in the same location. So we have the internal deep adrenal medulla and the more superficial adrenal cortex, and then a dense connective tissue capsule that surrounds the whole structure. So we end up with two separate glands in the same location, two roommates in one apartment. The adrenal cortex produces a whole series of hormones, over 30 hormones. And so we're just going to break it down into three broad categories. The first category is the mineralocorticoids. Mineralocorticoids affect the levels of sodium and water in the bloodstream, and also the levels of potassium in the bloodstream. So some of them affect sodium and water, some of them affect potassium. When mineralocorticoids are affecting sodium levels, it's increasing the amount of sodium in the bloodstream, which will also increase the amount of water in the bloodstream, which would also increase the blood volume and increase blood pressure. So have a lot of different ramifications for the body. And then other mineralocorticoids will decrease the blood levels of potassium, have most likely the kidneys remove potassium from the bloodstream and excrete it in urine. The second broad category is the glucocorticoids. Glucocorticoids relate to glucose production from amino acids. So normally, most of the glucose is either directly from the foods we eat, or is the case of other carbohydrates being turned into glucose. But it is possible to make glucose from amino acids. So glucocorticoids will stimulate the liver to produce glucose from amino acids, breaking down amino acids. Of course, if the body needs this glucose from the protein source, that means it also needs to increase protein breakdown so that more amino acids are present to be turned into glucose. Another effect that glucocorticoids can have is decreasing inflammation and decreasing the immune response, which in some cases is very useful. We don't want inflation to be persistent because it can lead to damage to tissues. And of course, there are times when the immune response needs to be decreased because, say, you've already gotten over that infection, so you no longer need to produce immune responses to that infection. And some of the glucocorticoids are controlled by the anterior pituitary gland. The third category are the androgens. Androgens are hormones similar to estrogen and testosterone. So androgens are sex hormones, as it were. They do things like initiate the growth of axillary and pubic hair, so the secondary hair in the armpits and crotch area. And since androgens are estrogen-like and testosterone-like, they are the source of estrogens for women after menopause. So menopause leads to a dramatic decrease in the amount of estrogen women produce, but they're still able to produce some estrogens via the adrenal cortex. All right, the adrenal medulla, the deeper gland. The adrenal medulla produces the hormones epinephrine and norepinephrine. Epinephrine and norepinephrine are the two main forms of adrenaline. And so, when these hormones are released, it stimulates the fight or flight response throughout the body. And these responses include increased heart rate, increased blood flow to skeletal muscles, increased release of glucose into the bloodstream, increased breathing, suppression of the digestive tract, dilation of the pupils, whole series of effects that occur when you are very angry or very scared. And the release of these hormones is triggered by direct nerve impulses from the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus directly controls the adrenal medulla through nerve impulses. And that is it for this part of chapter 22.